I'm here to talk about the pros and cons of 5G technology. In 2020, Verizon erected a tower with 5G antennas in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Levels of radio frequency radiation were well below the Federal Communication Commission guidelines. People living near the tower became ill after the antennas were activated. Doctors diagnosed them with microwave sickness, and some had to leave their homes for relief. Citizens complained to Pittsfield Board of Health, but after 18 months when nothing had been done, they took legal action against Verizon in Pittsfield. Eventually, the Board of Health agreed that there were some serious health issues, and they issued Verizon with a cease and desist order. Verizon retaliated and sued Pittsfield Board of Health. This situation is still unresolved as of 2023. I'm going to share with you some of the lessons learned at the end of my presentation. I've already used some terminology that I would like to explain. Three important terms are radio frequency radiation, microwaves, and millimeter waves. Radio frequency radiation is part of the electromagnetic spectrum and extends from 3 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz in frequency, and you can see here the associated wavelengths. Microwaves are a subset of radio frequencies, and millimeter waves are a subset of both radio frequencies and microwaves. Electromagnetic radiation is a form of air pollution. Insurance companies classify radio frequency as a pollutant and have exclusion policies against damages. Electromagnetic radiation is generated by wireless technology and electronic devices. Technology labeled smart involves two-way communication. It can be wired or wireless, and here are common devices that emit radio frequency radiation. It takes a long time for scientific information to be enacted in policy. It starts with an event that after some time causes a change. As an example, let's use development of radar during World War II and radar operators becoming sick. Scientists and medical doctors try to determine what is making them sick. If it's microwaves from radar, then they try to determine the mechanism of action and what levels are likely to be safe. They conduct research, share their information with colleagues, and once they come up with answers, they publish this in scientific journals, and sometimes their research is provided in newspapers as well. This process takes between 10 and 50 plus years. Scientists and physicians may try to convince the government to bring in policy to regulate the industry. Industry opposes the regulation for as long as possible. Eventually, public pressure or legal challenges convince the government to do the right thing, and new policy is brought in. This process takes between 10 and 50 plus years as well. When it comes to radio frequency radiation, by 1970, we had many of the answers regarding the biological effects of microwaves. To date, after 50 plus years, we still don't have proper regulations to protect the public or workers or the environment here in Canada, and this is due partly to the influence of big tech. When I was preparing this talk, I realized that we may see pros and cons differently. So if you want to count what you consider pros and cons of this technology. First of all, 5G is a combination of 4G and millimeter waves. 4G in earlier generations enhanced our ability to communicate, and most would consider this to be a benefit. 4G and earlier generation technology also turned out to be harmful to health. Children are particularly vulnerable. The World Health Organization classified radio frequency radiation as a Class 2B carcinogen, possibly carcinogenic, in 2011, and this is likely to change to a Class 1 carcinogen if industry doesn't interfere with the process. I would like to focus on electromagnetic sensitivity, which doesn't sound very serious. Here are common symptoms experienced by people who have EHS, also known as electromagnetic illness. In developed countries, between 3% and 35% of the population are likely to be adversely affected by radio frequencies. In the district of Muskoka, that translates to just under 2,000 individuals with severe sensitivity and just over 20,000 with mild to moderate sensitivity. So we are talking about a lot of people potentially getting sick from this radiation. Those who are severely affected are disabled by exposure. Many are unable to work and unable to go to hospitals. Some are homeless, and a few have contemplated medical assistance in dying. Millimeter waves enable the Internet of Things, which includes driverless cars and telemedicine. Some people are going to make a lot of money, and that includes the Canadian government selling licenses to providers of this technology, so they are not motivated to lower guidelines. Millimeter waves enable massive data handling, and that includes acquisition, storage, and analysis of data. Indeed, this is the primary reason for millimeter waves. This will enable electronic passports, digital currency, and possibly the end of paper currency. It enables massive surveillance for, among other things, facial recognition. This is already used in China for purchases and by police with special facial recognition software. In a democratic society, most people would agree this is an invasion of privacy. Millimeter waves have not been tested for safety with long-term exposure. We know that rain interferes with millimeter waves, so we need to question service reliability during storms. We know that trees block millimeter waves, and they're being cut down in some cities to enable this technology. Another important point is that small cell antennas are going to be placed on existing poles where possible. When it comes to aesthetics, at least they are not as ugly as other antennas. On the negative front, these exposures are likely to be harmful. These antennas are going to be placed 100 meters apart, which will result in more antennas that are closer to people, resulting in higher levels of radiation, and this is likely to be more harmful. Once again, I'd like to give an example related to electromagnetic sensitivity. This is a case report published this year for an apartment in Sweden where 3G and 4G antennas were replaced by 5G antennas. Exposure in the bedroom with 3G and 4G antennas was 9,000 microwatts per meter squared. Once the 5G antennas were activated, the levels increased exponentially. Family moved to an office space where levels were lower, and eventually they purchased a house in the country with very low levels of radiation. The reading taken in March 2022 peaked the meter used for these measurements at 2.5 million microwatts per meter squared. Health Canada's guideline allows for a total of almost 4.4 million microwatts per meter squared, averaged over a 6-minute period. Here we have the place and date from the previous slide and the exposure levels. The symptoms are in blue, with pale blue showing the number of symptoms and dark blue indicating severity of symptoms. These are the symptoms experienced by the husband and wife, with severity color-coded as shown here. This couple experienced a lot of symptoms when they were exposed to 5G radiation, with the wife having a much greater reaction than the husband. According to Health Canada, these exposures are safe. What if 5G comes to the district of Muskoka and people become ill? This is likely to increase pressure on healthcare services, impact work, and affect children and students. Important question to ask: is there a clause in your contract with the provider to remove the antennas if people become ill? I highly recommend this clause. If people become ill, they may take legal action against the provider. An important question to ask is, does the provider have insurance to cover damages? You should know that U.S. mobile operators have been unable to get insurance to cover liabilities related to changes and damages from long-term exposure to radio frequency emissions for over a decade. Citizens may also sue the health department if their health continues to deteriorate. Do you have insurance to cover damages? If you want insurance that will cover damages attributed to electromagnetic fields, you have to purchase additional pollution, liability, or policy enhancement coverage. This is how I added up the pros and cons. In my mind, the cons outweigh the pros considerably. We need to apply the physician's motto, first do no harm. You have an obligation to protect people in your community. If you protect the most vulnerable, you protect everyone. Thank you.